All right, welcome everybody back to the PHLY Sixers Podcast. We've got a full house this time, as I'm joined by Kyle Neubeck and Rich Hoffman, my two beautiful co-hosts. How you guys doing?
Beautiful. We
just trying to be nice.
We sat here during the pre-show hearing there needed to be less of Rich and less of Derek, and I don't know about beautiful, but it's always good to see you guys.
Take a compliment, Kyle.
Yeah,
I'm doing well, man. I'm excited to talk about not the Phillies or the Eagles. We're gonna have to give the Sixers people their fix today. And
yep.
I actually think this is a good topic, though, because I do think a lot of people are down on Daryl Morey right now. And I get it. It's been a rough offseason. Still a believer, though, and kind of want to talk about why.
Yeah, so as Rich said, the main topic of today's show will be about Daryl Morey. We'll briefly discuss a straw poll of executives from Tim Bontemps over at ESPN. Didn't have a whole lot of love for the Sixers. Before we do that, just a reminder to like and subscribe on YouTube.
Look at Derek.
Because I'm sick of Kyle. I'm so sick of Kyle. It's been 2.5 weeks and I can't stand him anymore, so I'm trying to get him off my back. Hit that subscribe button just to save me from a little bit of hassle. Also, we do have an audio-only podcast if that's what you prefer. I know I myself do a lot of driving, so I listen to a lot of audio podcasts. Search for PHLY Sixers on your podcast player of choice.
I will say, Derek, I wasn't going to give you grief today. I'm in a pretty good mood to start the morning because a neighbor of mine gave me essentially a random act of kindness to start the day. Had a really heavy box show up at my front door. I'm on my way out to come to work, obviously. And I was like, there's no way I can get this in myself. Guy walking by just says, here, I can help you get that in. Brought it in with me and, away with my day I went. So I'm in good spirits today.
Whoever that neighbor is, I appreciate you.
Shout out to Barry. That's what I'll say.
Let's send Barry a gift package because he gave me a little bit less cyberbullying to deal with here. Quite honestly, I'm wearing a Phillies hat because of what happened last night. Kyle gave me some grief for not wearing any Eagles paraphernalia yesterday, so I didn't want Kyle to bully me again. So most of this show will be about Kyle bullying me.
I wouldn't go that far, but I missed the memo. There's a lot of people wearing the maroon and white today. It's a good hat, Derek. Good job.
Yeah, I like it. All right. So as we mentioned, there was a straw poll on ESPN. Our good friend Timmy Bontemps, Timmy Straw Poll, polled 15 executives asking
Timmy Straw Poll.
I like that.
One.
Asking various questions, including who will be the best player in the league in 5 years, the MVP this year, where Lillard and Harden will start the season. I guess we'll start off, because we are going to lead into Daryl Morey. We'll save that one sort of for the end because it's natural transition. Best player in 5 years, Embiid got 0 votes. Does that surprise you at all?
No.
I think probably not because he's, 28, right? It's kind of. That list is littered with young players, Doncic and Edwards with 6 and 3 each. That makes sense. Even Jokic, who I think almost everyone would agree is best player in the league right now, or at least one of the two, along with Giannis. Jokic got 2 votes. Giannis didn't get any. So it's very heavily slanted towards the young up-and-coming players. MVP votes for this year. Embiid got 0 out of the 15 votes. Jokic led the way with 9. Giannis was second. Giannis and Tatum tied second for 2. That one, I think, probably surprised some people. But when you look at it, go with the superstar on a team that's going to win a lot of games. I don't think most people expect the Sixers to win as many games this year, if for no other reason than the uncertainty around Harden.
I would say I'm not surprised at all that Jokic was in this straw poll, the runaway favorite, because if I were going to put money down today, I think this is the clear-cut apology MVP is coming for Jokic. I think there are a lot of people who, look, they were split on their votes up until kind of the last, let's say, month and a half, month of the season last year, and Joel had not won one yet. Jokic being a 3 straight MVP guy would have been setting some historical precedent. Last guy who had achieved that was Larry Bird, and people backed away from it. And then the playoffs come around, and it's like, okay, this guy has now planted his flag and said, I'm the best player in the NBA, and I'm a title-driving player. And I think because of the circumstances surrounding last year's regular season MVP, him climbing the mountaintop now. He has that case as I'm number one in the entire league. I think there's going to be a backlash is probably the wrong way to phrase it, but there's going to be a snapback or rubber band effect in the other way. And I think Jokic is going to come out of the gate as I think the obvious favorite for MVP.
I'm kind of sick of the MVP. Like I kind of hope I kind of hope Joe has a great year, but he's just never in the conversation for it. So we just don't have to care about it because it's just people voting and it's people campaigning against each other than people being outraged about people campaigning against each other. It's just too much. I don't want to deal with it anymore. It would just be nice if Joe is the same player, or obviously hopefully better in the playoffs, but roughly as good as he has been over these past 3 years. And he's just not in the conversation anymore because of the fatigue of him winning last year and people saying, you're done.
No, I mean, I was happy that he won that MVP in part because it meant something to Joe. I'm happy he got it. And happy because we don't really have to worry about it too much anymore. There's not this great injustice. He got his MVP. We can focus on just winning a title. And I say that with us being able to focus, not him, because I don't think we talked about this a lot last year. A lot of what goes into winning a title also goes into being the best player in the league. There's really not you're not focused on one or the other. I think it's a forced debate sometimes. But is he going to win? Don't really care. And I don't think he should be anywhere near the front runner because he's just not going to win enough games unless Harden comes back. And even then, I think Jokic is still far and away the favorite. So who cares?
It would be funny if he led the Sixers to 57 wins or 56 wins and it was just out of control. And the debate raged on again because Jokic obviously is going to average 28.
We can never escape it, so I think that's exactly what's going to happen.
Jokic is going to average 20. He's going to have 28, 10, and 7 on 68% shooting from the field or something like that. So it will continue to get heightened. I think that would be pretty funny.
I will say this: if I'm trying to bet on or predict maybe out a little bit of an outside the box guy for MVP, I think Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, that this is the year that. I mean, he was a top 5 finisher last year. I think the Thunder now, with a little more experience under their belt, they win some more games. Shai has another, 30-point per game type season, stays healthy. I think he's the young guy that I could see all right, this might be the dark horse guy I would put my money on.
Yeah, because outside of him, there's a lot of players, like Doncic, where you don't know how many games. If there's one team that has a lot of variability, it's that team. They might just not win enough games for him to really matter. They certainly didn't last year.
Yeah.
He might end up being the best player or one of the 3 best players, but he's not going to win enough games to get the warrant. Tatum, I feel like there might be a little bit of fatigue, but because they have maybe a higher upside, I guess he's still a very legitimate candidate. And Giannis, there's probably just a little bit of fatigue, and especially coming off of a year where they won 1 million regular season games and then flamed out. He's sort of in a camp where Embiid is, where it's all right, but show me that your team, who did just win a title, so it's a little different, but I think he's going to have a truly exceptional regular season to surpass Jokic, and I would be surprised.
One quick thing on the best player in 5 years thing. I don't think Joe is going to be the best player in 5 years, but I do think he has a chance to be in that top. He probably has a better chance to be in that top tier of players than I think people give him credit for, and I understand the injuries are a big deal with him, but the athleticism to me is not a huge deal with him. That dude is so big and so skilled that he's not getting any worse as a a skill level. He's certainly not getting any shorter or stronger or anything like that. Yeah, he's going to get a little bit slower. His reactions are going to get, probably about half a step slower, those type of things as he ages. But I think he's going to age well. Now, obviously, he's got to stay healthy, but I would, he's been pretty healthy in the regular season. He has avoided the catastrophic injury to this point. And I think, fine, he's probably not going to be the best player in 5 years, but the idea that he'd be a top 10 player in 5 years, I don't think that's crazy at all.
I think to your point, the guy that he constantly got compared to, maybe not as much anymore, Hakeem Olajuwon. He comes out of Houston and, incredible athlete. He's smaller than Joe is. He's probably more of a 6'10" center than a 7 foot or 7'1" type guy like Joe is. But I think if you talk to the guys who played with Hakeem, as he got, I don't want to say less athletic, but as he gets older and he's less bouncy, all of that, he became a better player because the game slows down for him and he knows, all right, I'm going to chase this block or this play and this defensive sequence and not this one, and picking and choosing your battles and beating guys to spots and things like that. And Joe, with a size advantage over Hakeem, he can do that. If he can do those things and master the mental side of the game, I absolutely agree. Like, he's going to be an impactful defensive guy for forever. And because of, the touch from mid-range, and if he can ever be a consistent three-point shooter, all that, even when he's not as, physically imposing as he is now, he has the skill set that he can be an impactful guy until basically he decides to hang it up.
All right, 3 more topics from that poll, and then we'll move on to the main topic of today's show. Where Lillard will start the season, 9 picked Portland, 6 Miami. Of note, this was before sort of like the Toronto reporting came out, so I think that influences, not the report came out, but the questions were asked to executives before that report came out. Harden, 13 pick that he will start the season.
13 out of 15,
13 out of 15,
to be clear.
Yep. And then the worst offseason, nobody picked the Sixers to win the East. I don't think that stuns any of us. Worst offseason, Raptors, 5 executives picked, 76ers, 4, Heat, 2. I don't think any of that is surprising that those 3 teams are also directly sort of handheld by the trade requests, but it is what it is. Any of those surprise you, or any real thoughts on any of those?
No. So I think, look, so that essentially is NBA executives saying the Sixers had the second worst offseason in the aggregate. And I think that speaks to something we've talked about a lot, which is they're a team that is at least a trade away from, they're either a trade away or a James Harden recommitting to the team away from being whole, right? Like, the team doesn't really make sense on paper as it sits right now, with Harden either not playing or no trade return coming back. If you move Harden and you get a couple, 2 to 3 role players, or you get some sort of creation star or sub-star, guy below that level maybe ascending, then everything starts to come together a little bit. But it's a team that is in need of more chess moves and more activity. And it's been in this kind of weird stasis because I think Daryl Morey's position is that, well, I'm not trading James Harden for a crappy return. And so he would rather sit here and deal with the uncomfortability that they're dealing with right now than just say, all right, it's over and done with, and now we have a team full of expirings and role players and Joel.
I actually looked at Timmy B's straw poll from last year. I know, as Derek called him, Timmy Straw Poll. He does these very,
a lot, yeah.
very consistently.
And by the way, I like them. And we got a comment in the chat from Neil. I do like these exec straw polls because it's just good to know. Now, part of the problem is you don't know exactly like how high up these execs are. But I also trust Tim to.
Tim knows a lot of people and talks to a big spectrum of people around the league.
It's a good representative sample. I believe that. But I find these valuable and good.
I like these two where people are kind of voting on either yes or no questions or kind of these multiple choice questions, because I do think there is a fine line. Some of those anonymous scout and exec pieces, some of the quotes are pretty wild. And I think in some ways that's cool, right? You just want unvarnished opinions, but it's also like, okay, is this guy like the 8th scout for the Los Angeles Clippers? Like, and he's just completely trashing.
And you can
Joel
always
Embiid.
find a scout who will confirm your opinion if you want to.
Yeah, it goes to. I mean, Sean Hyken was talking about this yesterday because there was a lot of chatter coming out from Miami about Hero being valued as much as OG or Siakam or whoever. And it's like, well, you can find a scout that will agree with anything you want to print if you have a wide enough network base, for sure.
But like, look, they're fun to read, and on the other hand of that, the other side of that coin is I want unvarnished opinions, right? I want people, if they feel strongly about something one way or another, to just tell me what they're thinking. It would be boring if they didn't do that. So I looked at Timmy B's straw poll last year. Sixers came in second for best offseason last year, which I think was kind of the consensus, right? I think everybody thought they did really well for the resources that they had. This year, they're on the other side of that coin. I think Daryl Morey might say, let's wait until April to kind of decide how that happens. But look, we're going to talk about it right now. So
I'm going to have to go to a break before we transition into
We're running
that.
a little late, yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm here to tell you guys about our good friends at DraftKings Sportsbook. We are back again with another week of football, and DraftKings keeping us in on the NFL action. Great offers every single game day. And new customers can bet $5, get $200 instantly in bonus bets. Throw $5 down on any of the coming week's epic matchups. Walk away an instant winner. I know who I'm picking in Eagles versus Commanders, the Josh Harris Bowl this upcoming week. And DraftKings isn't stopping there. All customers can take advantage of 2 new offers every game day this September. And football is more fun when you're in on the action. So download the app now. Sign up with code PHLY. New customers can bet just $5 to get $200 instantly in bonus bets only on DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL with code PHLY. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Visit www.1800gambler.net. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. Please play responsibly. On behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort in Kansas, licensee partner Golden Nugget, Lake Charles, and Louisiana, 21 plus, age varies by jurisdiction, void in Ontario. See sportsbook.draftkings.com/football terms for eligibility, terms, and responsible gaming resources. Bonus bets expire 7 days after issuance. Eligibility and deposit restrictions apply.
Good question in the chat. Do you think Josh Harris will be at the Josh Harris Bowl?
I actually asked Derek the same question. I think it was either yesterday or Monday.
He has to be, doesn't he?
He has to show face. Yeah. You can't, if you own a team in Philadelphia and you own the Commanders and the 2 teams play, you can't be like, well, I'm stepping away from this one. I think people are already mad and have lost respect for him in some ways. This is at least like, invite the boos and do the David Stern ear cup. I don't think Josh is built that way. I don't think he'll quite react in that way.
Nobody's built that way.
But yeah, I think he certainly has to show up and show face at the very least.
Yeah, I mean, he'll show up to the same sports complex. He hopes his basketball team is not playing in 2030 or 2031, whenever that is. It is so funny though that just. He has owned a rival team of a Philadelphia sports team for what? A decade now? When did he buy the Devils? 2013? Nobody cares. Nobody cares, even an iota. The Devils are good. I was kind of reading Charlie's stuff or whatever.
Ass the other night.
Charlie was like, yeah, I mean, it's a preseason game, but they're a lot better. Like there's a reason they won 6-0. But man, you mess with the birds, it turns into a different level of scrutiny, all those things. And maybe rightfully so. That's the way it is here.
All right, so the main question of the pod, has Daryl Morey's tenure been good for the Sixers? I guess where would you, when you start to answer that question, where does your mind first go? How do you approach even answering that?
I think you have to start with the biggest stuff, right? Like we can get down to the nitty gritty of, he plucked Paul Reed out of the second round, or he traded Tony Bradley and second round picks for George Hill, and you can go through each individual transaction, right? But ultimately what a GM is measured by are what are your biggest hits and what are your biggest misses. And I think that you have to start with the Harden for Simmons exchange and where we come out on that.
It's sort of like in school, a homework assignment might be 1% of your grade, a quiz might be 5%, then you got 30% for the midterm and 50% for the final. And being a GM is very much like that. And there's really 2 moves of major consequence for the Sixers. One, drafting Tyrese Maxey, big part of it. It came barely after he was hired, but it was during his tenure. And then 2, the trade for James Harden. And there's no way to, that will drive the majority of people's opinions. That will drive the majority of how you view the future of the franchise. It's just is what it is.
All right. So what's the letter grade we are giving the Harden trade? Let's say not just the Harden trade, but you get the Ben Simmons shit sandwich in what, June 2021, whenever that was, up until February 2022 when you make that trade. What are you giving them? Come on.
See, a lot of this depends on what the other options were. Do you believe that they could have gotten Halliburton? Because that would be all of the angst that we have as a core, as a title window, as all of that goes away if they get Halliburton instead of Simmons.
So I'm going to push back on that.
I'm going to say I don't know for sure. I'm not convinced that the Kings were interested in Ben Simmons.
Where I'm going to push back is I don't think they're in long term. Yes, they're in a different position if it's Tyrese Halliburton on the roster instead of James Harden. I don't think what we've seen from Tyrese Halliburton up to this point suggests that if he was on the roster instead of James Harden,
no, I don't think
their
he won a
present
title.
circumstances are any different. They weren't beating Boston. They weren't going to beat Miami in the second round a year before. And so I don't in terms of the general mood around the team, Maybe it's slightly better because people say, okay, there's hope. Tyrese is ascending. He's just on Team USA. You have the Tyrese backcourt. And if you have Halliburton here, I know Maxey is like the sacred cow that nobody can touch or talk about right now.
Trade.
That's more of a, okay, maybe they can flip Maxey into this wing or this 4 who makes more sense with whatever it is, closer to a star level guy rather than Tyrese. You can't really trade at this point unless you are going fully all in, where in a Tyrese Halliburton situation, you can kind of straddle the middle ground and continue to build because Halliburton and Joel is still that's a 50 to 55 win team in the regular season. And you have some runway ahead of you. And frankly, I think let's just assume the Kings are interested in that deal. I think you're also not giving up first round picks or maybe as many first round picks as they did to make that happen because Halliburton at that point is still a bit of an unknown and, have to prove it rather than Harden, who's former MVP and had played at, when he was healthy, a top 5 MVP level in Brooklyn the year before. So it's interesting.
See, but that's sort of like my point. I don't think it changes what has happened over the last 2 years, at least not for sure. But I think a lot of where people are at right now isn't just that they haven't gotten out of the second round. Well, that's certainly part of it. Don't get me wrong. But it's that there's so little runway that you feel boxed in and desperate. And if you had someone young like Halliburton to build around Embiid, you could be more aggressive maybe in something like Dame, where, he might age out of being a superstar, but you still have that 2-man core. I think it's a little bit, I think people feel boxed in. I think that's part of it for sure.
I'm looking in the chat. Halliburton plays defense. He does not play defense.
Halliburton is a horrible defender because if he played any defense, Indiana would not suck on defense.
They're real bad.
He is a terrific young player. He plays no defense.
Yeah. And I do want to say there are people saying, oh, he averaged the same numbers on a worse team in Indiana. Yeah, that's the point. He hasn't won jack shit since coming to with Tyrese Halliburton as a driving force for your team. There is no proof that you can win games right now. Now, Tyrese Halliburton as a number 2 to Joel Embiid, sure. But the whole point of trading Ben Simmons in a James Harden type deal is that, okay, James Harden can do a lot of the running the offense and I'm going to take over for stretches of the game. Tyrese is a good player and a guy who can get you, 20 points. He can't just turn it on and say, I'm going to go out and score 40. No, Joe's having a tough night.
I agree. But at least a big part of where I am frustrated with is the franchise is because you don't know you don't have a pathway towards maintaining relevance around Joel Embiid.
I get it. The long-term stuff I get. All I'm saying is that trading for Halliburton would have had, in my mind, zero impact on whether you're getting out of the second round or not over the last 2 years. That's all it comes down to.
It's just that the standard we are holding Harden to is, can he get them a championship? And Tyrese Halliburton has never played to that standard. It turns into, Harden doesn't play defense in the playoffs. Harden shrinks in these games in the playoffs. Well, that's hard when you're playing against Jaylen Brown.
You have to actually get to the fucking playoffs. I'm sorry. This guy has never been there. He was just in the Olympics on a loaded Team USA. Even if it's a C team, Team USA, they're by far the most talented team at any given World Cup, Olympics, whatever. They couldn't even win a fucking bronze medal at the FIBA World Cup. He's one of their best players. I don't know. What's the argument here? What has this guy proven that he can drive winning in any kind of postseason playoff environment? I love Tyrese Halliburton. I hate that now I'm getting boxed into this.
I don't know why you're looking at it only through the lens of can he win a title now? Because that's not the lens I'm looking at it at all.
Well, that's what people are mad about, though, right?
Yeah,
they're not
it's
mad.
Not me. I'm a long-term.
Sure, you're not, but I'm saying the people at home they're mad because they have not gotten past the second round. It's all I hear. Wake me up when they get out of the second round. Wake me up when they get out of the second round. Wake me up when Tyrese Halliburton plays in a playoff game.
Here's what I'll say. I think there's. If they had not advanced past the second round, I think Embiid would probably be bearing more of the blunt. They'd be more disappointed in Embiid. Whereas right now, it's both Embiid and hopelessness.
Yeah. And look, I'm certainly not a James Harden defender. He's got the years and years of the playoff loser energy.
Sure.
The game 6 and 7, as I wrote at the time, were absolutely disgraceful. You can't sit here. Well, he won the 2 games for him, and that's absolutely true. He has that ceiling. But as we've seen in the past, his floor in the playoffs has been more significant for James and his teams than what he can do on his best night.
So look, I agree. And I would have made the Harden swing over Halliburton at the time, just because of what he had shown in Brooklyn, all of those things. And look, when Tyrese Halliburton, when he finally gets put in that playoff crucible, we'll see. That defense is going to be put to the test. Can he create in the half court? That is going to be put to the test. Like Indiana and Sacramento, they have just run up and down the floor when he has played. And I think as we have learned over the past 6 years in Philadelphia, playoff basketball is a lot different than the regular season. Okay, all that said, it would be a lot better if he was on the team instead of James Harden right now.
100%. I 100% agree.
And I think when it comes to Daryl, you do have to judge okay, he waited out the Ben Simmons situation and I think made a good trade for James Harden, but you also have to be prepared for what happens in a couple years when James Harden wants to get paid and James Harden gets older and James Harden uses the basketball as a weapon, 5 times a game when he's going to the basket, those things like that. And Daryl Morey, above everybody, had knowledge of that. He had firsthand knowledge of, his off-court habits, all of those things as well. So that's where I kind of look at that trade to me feels like C+, B-, probably B-, I'm being a little hard on him because I do think Ben Simmons put them in one of the worst spots ever. So to get out of that and have a normal basketball team over the past couple of years is a good thing. But what is happening now, he does bear a little bit of the blame here. He did have to see that coming.
So I guess, why don't you go do your second ad read because we're on that, and because I feel like what we're going to start doing is going to be along.
Well, I do want to touch on Ben when we come back, but first I want to tell you guys about our good friends at Game Time. Obviously, if you want to go see if James Harden is at the arena this year or causing a stink on the Wells Fargo Center floor, or more realistically, you want to go see Tyrese Maxey and it's the last minute and you want to go see his development play out, Game Time is the place that at the last minute you can go and get tickets for an affordable price and have them sent to your phone instantly. Browse through the Game Time app and there are flash deals, last minute tickets, images of your seat views, a low price guarantee, you have event cancellation protection, and you can buy tickets in a matter of seconds. You could be in the parking lot of the Wells Fargo Center, 2 taps, you're set. Tickets get sent directly to your phone. Never have to dig through your email to find them, and it's that easy. You just walk right through the doors and probably load up on some adult beverages to make you forget about all the Sixers circus that's happening on the floor. So snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code PHLY for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code PHLY for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. So you guys brought it up, but the biggest component of the Simmons trade is simply getting off of Simmons before the entire NBA has now figured out this guy is cooked, essentially.
It's a big deal.
Physically, which is what Simmons and his camp have played up the most. The mental side of it, which we certainly saw how that played out in the playoff series against Atlanta a few years ago now. And if they had held on to him and he had played, just think about a scenario where Ben comes to camp that year and actually decides he's going to play with the team and is able to play. And people see that he goes from, like a 16, 8-8 guy, I think is generally what he was around when he was at his best, to a 6-4-4 guy, which is what he was in Brooklyn. You go from, okay, this guy is an interesting lottery ticket to bet on, to he is an albatross that we cannot get off of the team. And that's almost, if not bigger than who was coming back from him, is getting off of that before the music stopped, essentially.
Yeah. So I guess the other part of the Ben thing is not trading him the year before at the deadline, whether that be for Harden or any other package that might be out there. I remember at the time, and one of the components that goes into this, at the time, I would have said, look, if it took Tyrese Maxey to get James Harden, I would have done that at that point. James Harden at that point was a MVP, at least a fringe MVP candidate, as he would show in Brooklyn, sometimes the moves you get credit for are the ones you don't make, and not including Maxey there. While you lost out on one more run with maybe a healthier James Harden, although he would go on to get that, what was it, hamstring injury that season. But you would have had one more run with Harden, one more full season where he wasn't joining you in midway through or 2/3 of the way through. But you would have lost Tyrese Maxey. And I think at that point, I didn't give Maxey enough credit. He still hadn't shown that he could be an elite shooter as he has become. So I give him some credit for not making the move that I thought was a pretty much a no-brainer. So I do give him some credit for that.
We talk about the trade deadlines too. I mean, I think Maxey was rumored in that first trade deadline, whether it was with Ben, Kyle Lowry, remember, was a big name.
The Kyle Lowry one was the big one.
That was a big year. Now, how did those talks actually go? I think Masai Ujiri's history says he probably was shooting for the moon with that one. But look, at the time, I was like, this team is probably a little bit short of a championship, but they're really good in a lot of aspects. You're going to get the number 1 seed. You might as well go for it. I think at that point, Maxey, like Derek said, he had not shown a ton to me yet. And I was, kind of more focused on this season. So holding on to Maxey has been a great thing. There's just no question about that. Now, where does it get them moving forward? I don't know. But again, some of the moves he hasn't made. And I think drafting Tyrese Maxey 20th, that buys you a lot of goodwill. It just does.
I will say, I almost give him more credit for not trading Maxey than I give him for drafting him in the first place. Because that was, what was it, on the job for 2-3 weeks? I don't think he necessarily had, I'm not going to say he didn't have input in that decision, but I think a lot of that was driven by the people who were already there doing the work on the scouting. But he gets credit. I'm just not sure how much credit to truly give him.
I don't know. He was the GM of the team, wasn't he?
Yeah.
He was.
Yeah, and look, I will say, if we're being Derek over here and trying to pick it apart, I do think that he was the very obvious, he's a highly regarded guy who's falling. That wasn't he didn't pick some obscure dude out of Lithuania or something. That was blue chip prospect from Kentucky who, maybe had not shown as much as many Kentucky players don't under Cal there. And now that he's been given a real opportunity, but again, you still have to make the pick. It doesn't, if you're just being a contact hitter, you're still hitting the single, you're hitting the double. And I think, Tyrese was a triple, if not a home run.
Oh, absolute
in
home
that
run
spot,
at 21, for sure. And I remember going back to it, Rich and I on the podcast at the time, we didn't even really talk about Tyrese because we didn't think there was any chance he was going to be there.
I thought he was going to fall, but look, Pat Riley whiffed on him. A bunch of people on those teams, whiffed on him and took worse players. So I do think you deserve some credit there. I guess what do you think of these trade deadlines, where they were at the end of the season? I mean, I remember the George Hill, what was that for? 4
2
second-round picks or something
I
like
thought it was
that?
just 2.
No, it was 4.
It was 4?
4 second-round picks. I actually have the trade right in front of me as we speak. So they traded Tony Bradley Jr. and 2 second-round picks to the Thunder, and then they traded salary and 2 second-round picks to the Knicks because Brazdeikis was included in that deal, and what a career he had.
Whenever you have a chance to have another Iggy on the team, you got to.
Yeah. Now, look, it was a conditional second to the Knicks that turned into pick number 58, who they used to draft Jericho Sims, who has had a decent career so far. The next one is a 2024 conditional or a protected from Miami, which that's probably not super valuable, but it's less about these picks being valuable than it's just a chip to move.
Yeah.
We've seen over the last year, especially at the deadline, guys were getting flipped. Sadiq Bey was getting traded for, 5 second-round picks? And so they have become the currency of maybe the fringe-ish or rotation young guy that somebody doesn't want to pay. You're going to flip a bunch of second-round picks for him. And the Sixers, prior to that shift happening, unloaded a bunch of them for George Hill, who basically did absolutely nothing during his Sixers tenure.
No, he was bad.
The funny thing about George Hill was I thought, okay, this is a decent middle ground. It obviously would have been better than going after Kyle Lowry, I think. But, man, it was just a pumpkin. It just didn't work. He was not good.
He didn't play most of the time.
He was hurt. And then the other thing was, I remember there was a game against Atlanta. I believe the Sixers won this one. It was game 3. George Hill went out there and he ran around like a chicken with his head cut off. Like he was supposed to be Mr. Stability veteran guy.
Yeah.
He gave you a Jonah Bolden stretch for like 4 minutes. I was like, has this guy ever played in a playoff game before?
And he just wouldn't shoot either. It was very frustrating. It was a frustrating experience.
It's like the whole reason he's there too.
That was a bad one. And I think you're absolutely right, Kyle. And I think that the idea of just unloading all these picks, like what was the first thing he did when he came here? He unloads Horford, but he attached a pretty good pick to him.
That's a real asset.
Yeah, but you had to get off of that contract. Like that move honestly, if you go back to it, I bet you thought it was going to cost more than one pick to get off of Horford.
I would agree, but so it's the difference between how you evaluate it at the time versus how we evaluate it in hindsight, right? At the time, it's like, get Al Horford the hell off of this team. He's making Joel's life miserable. He's not helping the bench units with Ben enough to justify you're going to keep paying this guy the amount of money he's making over the short to medium term. But then you see him in Boston and contributing to a team that makes the finals and makes a conference finals.
Right, but he was never going to look like that here. He was never going to have a chance to rehabilitate his value.
So he was traded under the idea that this guy's cooked.
He spent a year in the back of the tank in OKC. Like, he was never going to look like that.
I understand this. All I'm saying is people look at it now and say, you traded this guy under the pretext that he's washed and we need to move him. Clearly was not. Now, that year away in Oklahoma City, that's essentially a sabbatical in the middle of his career, that helped a lot. He was not getting a sabbatical in Philadelphia, and that was not going to be a thing that happens here. But for him to go on and not only be a contributor on a finals team, but a guy who once again gives Joel problems in a high-stakes playoff series, that you do have to reevaluate the trade somewhat. And I'm not saying that I was 100% on board with it at the time. They get a real contributor in Danny Green who fits with the team. But you can't just be like, well, hand wave it away. It's what I thought at the time. We have to go back and say Horford's better and had a longer, end of his career than I thought he would.
Long-winded Kyle. Calm down for 1 second. Let me just ask you one question. If they keep him, bring him into the trade deadline next season, do they get more? Does it cost more or less to get off of that contract?
It's impossible to know that. I don't know.
That's the decision you have to make as a GM.
Sure.
I think it costs the same, if not more. I don't think all that you're talking about of him not being washed, he wasn't going to show that if he stayed on the roster. They had to move him when they did.
Well, it's also tough to go back to that point because I would say half the fan base is not accurate, but a giant chunk of the fan base at that time was on the trade Joel over trade Ben camp. It was the Ben and shooters.
There were people who said that.
And I fought back against that loudly. I'm
not giving Daryl credit for that. Anybody who runs an NBA team should have known that.
And there were a lot of smart media people or people who I thought were smart who had the same belief. So it was a really weird situation. I understand why they felt they needed to get off Horford. I still, again, at the time, I was 100% on board with what they did. All I'm saying is that you look back at it now, and it's like they gave up a real pick or a real trade chip anyway, and Horford went on to fuck with them personally. It hurts.
I think Al Horford is just this franchise's kryptonite in just a million ways. Like he's going to sabotage them from within. He's going to beat the hell out of them from outside. Yeah, he's always going to be this very annoying Sixers figure. Frankly, I'm going to be honest. I think he should get booed a lot harder when it comes to Philadelphia.
There's not enough rage for him.
He was terrible.
And that's part of it too. Like if he came back for another year, he wasn't going to try. You weren't getting the playoff Boston Al Horford. He was not going to try. He wanted off that team.
And then he comes back to Boston. He's pump faking Joel and dunking on him and those things. Like, where was that effort here? I understand the fit was terrible, but
we say it all the time. Man. That guy was stealing money he was in Philadelphia. Just absolute disgrace.
So I do,
and that was not on Morey. He certainly did not sign him to that deal. That's before his time. I do think that portion of the Morey era, with getting off of Richardson, with getting off of Horford, with getting Maxey, I think that was a very good start. The Richardson for Seth Curry trade, absolute slam dunk. Like that was an unbelievable deal.
I thought the way he set up that first team on that night. Now, we can talk about whether the price was too much to get rid of Horford, but just the setup of getting Seth and Danny for Al and Josh. That team won a ton of games that year. They were really good. Now, you're going to say COVID year, all those things. Were they going to win anything in the playoffs? Well, no, they weren't going to win anything in the playoffs, but that was Ben Simmons' fault for the most part. So maybe Doc Rivers' fault a little bit also. We can talk about that too. A lot of people don't like Doc Rivers. Doc Rivers was already here before Daryl Morey got here. So
just the strangest freaking organization ever. They can't even get the order of operations right. It's so weird. It's so weird. All right, so I guess we'll get into sort of the coach because I think that's a portion of, or maybe enabling the coach. I think that's a portion of this discussion. Before we do that, a quick word from FOCO. Kyle, do you want to do this now or midway through and distract me? FOCO is a leading manufacturer of sports and entertainment merchandise with a product line that includes apparel, accessories, toys, collectibles, novelty items, and more. You're seeing it now. We're all wearing Eagles or Philly stuff in a set at times. You want to get your gear too. It's the best officially licensed gear for all sports and fandoms, and with us now squarely in football and tailgating season, it means it's time for overalls, hoodies, hats, sunglasses, bags, everything you need for a game.
Speaking of, I saw some Phillies overalls in the clubhouse celebration last night that I believe they are available on FOCO.
They got the Drew Stubbs overalls?
I think so.
Can we get you two in here in overalls? Let's make that happen.
I don't know about all that.
FOCO has hooked PHLY up and provided awesome pieces for our sets. FOCO always has our back for Philly sports, and they have yours too. Get the best gear around by using the link in our description. For all non-presale items, use a promo code PHLY for 10% off. So the coach.
Getting my fat ass in overalls, that feels like a fantasy football.
There's no chance. It has nothing to do with overalls. It has to do with me. The coach. You mentioned that he was hired before Morey. That's absolutely true. I don't think Morey could have walked in and be like, we're changing coaches after 2 weeks. That's just not... Getting Josh to sign off on that, probably not going to happen. He had $6 billion he had to spend elsewhere. But, there is a little bit like, I attribute the backup center a lot to Doc and getting sort of players that will placate Doc or Doc will play. I give Morey, Morey's indifference towards a backup center that can play defense for 2 playoff runs. And look, he'll push back. Only playing 10 minutes a game, only a minimum salary. You let Doc play to his worst instincts, and that did annoy the ever-living hell out of me.
Yeah, that's one where I don't fully know the internal politics behind some of these decisions.
Sorry.
It is very obvious that having a coach and a GM who are on the same page at all times will help an organization. And it was not always clear that Doc and Daryl were seeing things eye to eye. I think they said all the right things. I think there was an effort made by both parties to sort of bridge whatever gap was there between them. But when you see, DeAndre Jordan as the backup center in a playoff game or long stretches of the regular season, or Trez. Now, the only thing I would say on Trez is that I think that's a James... A James-heavy decision as well, and you always have to factor... Which
Doc was very eager to let us know.
Obviously Doc is happy to throw his players under the bus for decisions that are unpopular. But I do think there's elements of that we have to consider. But that being said, Daryl, as the guy overseeing everything in the organization, has to know if you acquire a DeAndre Jordan-type player,
play him.
Doc is going to play that guy. And so that I absolutely put on Daryl. How big of a consideration that is weighed against the Harden trade, Maxey draft, etc. It's certainly not as important as those things, but those little decisions add up over time. The George Hill, those type of decisions, they add up over time.
Well, you go back to 2021. I think a lot of people kind of put this on the back burner a little bit, but one of the things we were saying at the trade deadline was like, hey, Dwight is a good regular season player. Look, they're winning a lot of games. He rebounds. He throws some hard fouls. He cracks us up when they're up by 25 points because he does something ridiculous with the Frosty Freeze out. But it's like, can you play another way in the playoffs? Can you figure out how to get more of a stretch big because you have Ben Simmons on your team?
Yeah.
And predictably, so they don't get anybody, and predictably, the Dwight Ben minutes in the playoffs were awful.
Absolute disaster.
Awful. So, again, I think that's another little knock against him.
Josh asks, where's Greg Oden at? Can we expect an appearance from him soon? I mean, look, could always add another center to this roster. Can't hurt at this point.
Greg Oden is coaching at Butler, I believe. There was a good story about that.
Good for him, man. Derek and I talked about him recently, about him in the 07 championship game against Florida, where they were doomed. That Florida team was always going to win, but he went out there. I think he had like 25 and 11 or something, which college game, that's pretty damn good.
I will say thank goodness for Paul Reed for developing, because we can put this conversation to bed a little bit. And they have done pretty well with their late draft picks. And I'm including Maxey. That's a late draft pick in my book. So the fact that they devalue them so much is a little bit annoying. You understand that they're trying to use those as trade chips. But it would be nice to make one or two other second-round picks, including in that draft. Isaiah Joe was a second-round pick in that Tyrese Maxey deal. I give him a lot of grief for cutting him. I don't think they should have done that. And I was on the record at the time. I think there's a tweet out there. Max Rappaport can probably dig it up.
I have a screenshot of it
where I said he would be their starting two-guard. Missed a little bit on that one. My point is to say
that's why you're mad. Your prediction went awry.
To be clear, like I was probably closer than a lot of people thought.
Yeah.
But I wasn't right on that. That's not why I'm bringing him up. My point is I was always on the Isaiah Joe should have gotten more run here bandwagon. So I give Doc a little, I give Doc a lot of blame for that. Daryl a little bit too.
How much of the angst, and by the way, the chat has been very lively today, which has been great. Even when you're calling us stupid and apologists, I appreciate it. This has been
we appreciate every one of you for tuning in, even the ones who are assholes.
You're passionate, and this has kind of been a subject that's kind of people have strong opinions about. Here's a question for you guys. How much of the angst do you think is because of kind of the unsatisfactory nature of this offseason? And I say unsatisfactory because like he could have given James Harden the bag, and I think in terms of rocking the boat, that wouldn't have mattered. Like you wouldn't be seeing that. Like
that would have been the easiest path.
They would be in training camp, and Harden would be happy, and there wouldn't be, I mean, those level of bad vibes. But you'd
be screwed.
Decided to take the path of like, okay, like I have a year to play with here, and that would screw us for the future. So we're kind of going to have to take our medicine for these couple months. I wonder how much of the angst is based on that. Where
a lot of it.
I think what he's doing, even though it's not perfect with the free agent class next offseason, I agree with not giving James Harden the bag. So, I kind of wonder, like, if that changes, are people paying as much attention to this? I don't know.
I would say, I think the only way to avoid sort of where they're at right now is to give Harden a contract that I would hate. And so in terms of what happens, the only way to really prevent that is to give that bad contract or not trade for James Harden. So, in terms of what he's done this offseason, and look, they have had a bad offseason, but I'm not sure there was an avoidable path, which, again, probably goes back to, well, could Daryl have predicted this? Could he have predicted that his finishing around the rim would get worse, especially after that Achilles injury? Could he have predicted that he would react this way to not getting the full max contract? Probably. So a lot of the evaluation of the Harden trade goes back to what other options were out there.
It's sort of like when the Eagles go for it on a 4th down and everyone's really supportive of them being aggressive.
Until they don't get it.
And then they get stopped and it's like, well, don't do it that way. You have to actually provide an alternative that they could have done. Right?
I'm one of those people too.
I'm 100%. The other night when they went for it on 4th down early in that game,
Kenny
I was like,
Gainwell,
what the hell was that play? So I 100% get it. But I think to the point you guys are making, I think if they traded James Harden tomorrow, the mood in the fan base is lifted by 20%. Now, 20% is not getting you all the second round baggage, all the anger at Joel for injuries and struggles in the second round, so on and so forth. But I do think a big part of the dissatisfaction right now is like a lot of the comments that we're seeing today. They're old, they're unathletic, it's a lot of one-year guys. And look, we can sit here and say the long-term planning makes sense. And they're setting themselves up for summer of 2024 or trade deadline. You have flexibility to make trades and make moves. But that being said, people do want to buy into teams that they believe have hope and a future and a long-term. And right now, all they're selling is, well, this year it just kind of is what it is, and we're going to figure out the rest later. That's not an appealing thing for people who are already pissed off that they haven't done more with the 3, 4, 5 seasons that we just went through.
Yep.
And look, I'm seeing a lot of comments in the chat like, where is this Joel's fault ever? And I think the answer to that is, a little bit it is.
Yeah.
And, going into last season, I kind of thought Daryl did his job. Like, okay, did the PJ Tucker signing actually turn out that well?
Yeah.
Debatable. I think PJ was a very limited player. Now, Did he have a couple okay moments in the playoffs that we're looking back on fondly? If they win Game 6, if Joel and Harden get them over that level. So I think there is also an element of, like he did his job. He gave them a pretty good team, and those guys didn't quite get them over the hump. And I do think some of that blame has to go back on them. Now, did Dan House and Tucker turn out to be star signings? No, but, a little bit goes on Joe here.
Yeah, and look, he inherited a team with, maybe the two worst fits in the league on big contracts in Richardson and Horford, with Ben Simmons, who is about to completely combust. And are things perfect? No, but I think it would have been tough to make things perfect, right? A lot of this comes down to the fact that they haven't progressed, and I get that. But the decisions themselves, I think basically what I'm saying is I think he's probably done like a B- job, but because of how much the Harden situation is clouding things, it's viewed as a D. And a B- might be a little high, but a D is probably a little low. I think there was a lot working against the Sixers that would have made it tough to be completely confident at this point.
Yeah, I want to stay on that Rich point about Joel and the amount of blame he gets. Coming out of that Game 5, I think we probably all felt at the time like this is the breakthrough, right? Yep. We're in the media room prior to Game 6 saying that was the most composed, professional performance the Sixers have had in round 2 in the time that we've been covering the team, and in one of the best ones in our lifetimes, quite frankly, because there haven't been a lot of good Sixers teams to even talk about, think about. To win in that fashion, Tyrese had a very good game in that Game 5. Joel was not his best game, but it's like a 30-point, maybe 11 for 23. Really good defensive outing.
That was a whole roster win.
The whole team, you're looking at it like finally the vision is coming together. Joel is making that leap as a leader, all that stuff. And for it all to come unraveled in Games 6 and 7, we can say DeAnthony Melton didn't make shots, Tobias didn't do this, James melted down like he has 100 different times in the playoffs. Ultimately, you have the fucking MVP of the league on your team. And even if he's hurt, I understand the caveats are there. He did not show up the way he needed to push them into the conference finals, and frankly has not done so, and has been the common thread between all those teams across the board. So while, yes, I don't think that he was individually to blame for a bunch of these second-round exits, you have to, yes, I torched that guy after that series, and I think he deserved to be.
And to your point, and I just listed, all the maybe time bombs or landmines that were in the Sixers' path from when Morey took over. I didn't even mention the 5-year, $180 million man, Tobias Harris, who's been really hamstringing them with his contract.
Yes.
And that just shows where Tobias Harris is and that contract. We don't even mention it. And it was a real sticking point in terms of team building. To have inherited that, and then you're also your star player just not execute. Where were they going to win a championship if Joel Embiid doesn't drive them to it? And I think a lot of the angst comes from the fact that hasn't happened. So yeah, I certainly think, and this Harden situation is freaking annoying. But I think a lot of the angst comes from Joel Embiid not being who we need him to be and who we hoped he would be. And that does cloud a little bit not only the grade, but just the overall feeling of the team. They need him to be the MVP in the playoffs as well. And if that doesn't happen, I don't really care what Daryl Morey does. They're not winning a title.
Yeah.
I do. Kyle made the right point, though. If he trades Harden, it's one of those where I think a lot of the fan base says, great trade, who do we get back?
Yeah. What was that? Was it the Von Hayes? Is that where that came from?
I forget.
It might have been Von Hayes.
But yeah,
I'm older than you guys.
It's the feeling of sameness. It's here we go again. And they got, after going through the Ben Simmons situation where Ben is holding the team hostage to a certain extent, and Morey, I guess rightfully at the time, the one thing he absolutely did right in that scenario was just wait, right? Instead of trading him you trade him for CJ McCollum. They're certainly not a higher ceiling, and I think people are even more hopeless. They're winning less games in the regular season. That's a whole different path. Getting Harden was better than that, and holding on for that was good. But I think the fan base now having lived through, Joe's got to get them to the deadline so they can make the trade that makes them a real team or hopefully makes them a real contender. I get why people want to check out on that and say, yeah, I'll come back after the Eagles are done, the Phillies playoff run is over. I can feel that. I understand that. But look, Nick Nurse is here. They have Tyrese. They have some things of hope to hold on to. And whatever issues they have as a contending team, Joe will make them win a lot of regular season games, base level.
When you get back to Morey, too, you mentioned the best thing he did was wait. And I think a lot of people would agree with you on the first time, but they don't think back to, January 15th, Joel scores 45 points, and everybody's saying, get this guy some help. This would be malpractice not to get him. So it's obviously not fun going through one of those situations. And the thing with Daryl Morey is you can say whatever you want about him. He does not care. Like, he is just going to wait again until he thinks he can get the best deal. That's not appetizing for people to do a second trip through that level of slop. I understand that.
Yeah, and we've got a comment. This all stems back from Josh Harris. I think Ed is 100% right. Like, the fact that they fucked up for so long, and look, people are going to call me a Morey apologist, whatever. The fact that they screwed up with all those assets meant that Daryl Morey needed to do an A in order to get them to where they needed to be. If it's a B- or even a C, it's just not going to be good enough because they spent 5 years just completely burning every asset they could possibly think
Daryl
of.
Morey didn't trade Mikal Bridges for Zaire Smith and a pick that they eventually flipped for Tobias Harris before they eventually signed Tobias Harris to a $180 million contract that hamstrung the team financially. Like, that's all things that he inherited. Now, as we keep pointing out, he did inherit Joel Embiid, who that's the most important thing here, right? But all the other surrounding context matters. If he has a more complete team, a team with less blanks that need to be filled in, you're not having to take risks on, James Harden coming off a hamstring injury, and you can flip Ben for a young ascending guy. If Tyrese Halliburton joins the team that has Maxey and Mikal Bridges and Joel Embiid and other guys they realistically could have had, not like, they could have drafted Giannis in 2013, but they could have had a guy they just straight up drafted under a previous regime and kept that guy and not traded for Tobias and not done this. We're not even having this conversation. Yep. So yes, he has not been perfect. I would tend to agree it's probably more of in the B-, C+ type range, depending on how charitable you want to be. But there are a lot of mistakes that were made prior to him even sitting in that chair.
And I also think he's avoided some of the mistakes that could have been completely crippling. Of those, trading Tyrese Maxey or giving James Harden this contract. I was freaking terrified of betting on a 34-year-old James Harden for the next 3 to 4 years. Like, that could have been a death sentence to the franchise. I do give, and look, when he was hired, we went, oh shit, he's got these James Harden blinders. No. What are we getting ourselves into? The fact that and look, you don't want to give him, it's weird giving people credit for not making mistakes, but there were a lot of different ways they could have gone, which maybe would have made this year better, which would have made the next 3 just a complete disaster. And they haven't completely done that yet.
It's a weird thing where I could just say his track record, I think, is really good. I think he's well respected around the league. People who don't care about this specific situation quite as much as we do, having to talk about it, having to live about it, or live through it every single day. I just believe in him. And I agree with you, Derek. As unsatisfactory as this offseason has been, I think he's largely making the right decisions. Like, he's giving me confidence that he's got a little bit more of a long-term view and not kind of chasing the path of least resistance here.
I would guess he thought, all right, let's trade for James Harden, maybe get 3 playoff runs out of him, and then see what Embiid and Maxey can try to carry us to. And I think that's still largely where they are. And it's probably, and again, a lot of it goes back to what other options were there with James Harden. And that's going to be tough to find out now because there's no team that's going to admit behind closed doors, oh yeah, we were really all in on Ben Simmons. Like, they're just not going to admit to that right now.
Yeah.
So unless you can really get definitive proof, and that's probably why we started this whole debate on the Halliburton thing, because that's the one that was out there. Unless you can get definitive proof of that, it's hard to really grade that specific James Harden trade without knowing the alternatives.
Yep. So, I mean, look, I can feel the angst that is just jumping off the screen.
Yep. This has been a great topic.
Yeah, the commenters, obviously, like, look, this is what we've been hearing on social all summer. When I see people out at, in the city who, know our work, who are like, what the hell are these guys doing? Blah, blah, blah. I get it, man. Like, nobody wants to root for a team that's stuck in the same spot over and over and over again. And as we discussed plenty throughout this podcast, doesn't have a lot of realistic paths out of it, and doesn't, frankly, currently have a lot of upside on the roster. That's the other thing. Like, I have belief, or small bits of belief, in guys like Jaquavion Smith and Springer that, that's at least like something a little bit different, something new. It feels fresh. And you have the head coach. But, like, are those guys the difference between beating Boston in round 2 or beating Milwaukee in round 2? I would say in 99% of the time, no. It's going to be on what are the big moves, who are the big players. And one of their big players is saying that Daryl Morey's a liar. And I guess I would close on this, on the Morey front. If his guiding belief is stars drive titles, it's a stars at all costs league, and his relationship with one of his 2 main stars has completely crumbled, that's a thing that we should criticize him for more. Like, get away from the transactions. This is his guy that he has, like a decade-long relationship with. For him, for whatever reason, they've explained it away as they didn't want to get in trouble for tampering after last offseason and so on and so forth. Look, I'm just saying what the explanation has been. You don't have to agree with it. For whatever reason that it has crumbled, and that is at his feet, and it's his job right now to figure it the hell out, because as it stands right now, there is no trade that's out there that they deem suitable. So now it's your responsibility. Get him on the floor and wanting to play for your team, period.
Yeah. Completely agree. That's the main thing I blame him for, is not seeing down the road with how he felt about Harden and how Harden would react if he did not feel as strongly as kind of the Houston days, the hug coming off the plane, all of those things, if that changed. And, that is what they are dealing with right now. And you're right. It's his responsibility above everything.
I also think the whole oh man, James Harden really loves Daryl Morey and Tad Brown. Not to say that there probably wasn't a connection there, but the connection was, Daryl Morey put him in a spot where he can make a freaking ton of money.
And essentially do whatever he wanted on the floor too.
Well, when he's no longer getting that complete bag and he's only getting a partial bag and he's not getting full control of a team, it deteriorating, I don't think is necessarily a huge surprise. You hope that there was enough goodwill built between them that it wouldn't get to this. But I think James Harden, once he entered this phase of his career and he wasn't being the centerpiece and he wasn't getting the maxes, it was always going to be probably a little problematic.
But it goes back to...
He should have predicted that.
He should have known that, right? I put everything around this guy in Houston to make him the MVP and kind of build the organization around him. And like you said, let him do whatever he wanted. Well, that wasn't going to be the case when he's 34 years old.
All right. I think it's probably just about all we have. We have a lot of active chatter in the comments. Great to see. Again, we really do appreciate each and every one of you that drop in there, even if you disagree with us. That's why it's a great debate.
Yeah, I love being called an apologist and
it's gonna
all
happen,
that good
man.
stuff. But thank you so much.
I've been called so much worse on Twitter, and I still go on there. So thank you, both of you, for jumping on. And go Phils.
Yeah, well, thank you. I see Sam, I see Ray, I see TN, I see Ed, I see all kinds of people here. Thank you guys so much. Hit that thumbs up button on the way out. Subscribe to the channel. And gentlemen, I'll see you again tomorrow, yeah?
Let's do it.
We all silly like the mayor.